The time has finally come for me to do a practice test interactively on my channel. This will be a full-length verbal section of a GRE practice test from McGraw-Hill, and it's available free on their website, link in the description. If you like this mode of me interactively taking a full test, then I'll look at the feedback and then decide to do more of these kind of videos. Or I could go back to teaching topic by topic. Either way, there are plenty more practice tests out there for free that I can go through, so if this works, that would be great. Now, there's going to be one difference with this video compared to my other videos, is that I'm not going to have time to really explain my answers too well, because I'm going to do this under time conditions. So if I see an answer, I'm going to kind of have to pick it and not really explain it, because otherwise I won't finish in the right amount of time. So if you see me picking an answer and you don't quite understand it, I'm going to glance at the explanations at the end, and you can maybe pause the video and try and work out why. As always, you can also do this test yourself by either doing it online or pausing every time you see a new question and trying it out yourself. As I say, this will be less about teaching the content and more about you seeing my techniques in action, this time for the verbal, next time for the quant. And as always, even though I am a 340 GRE instructor, I may well make mistakes, so don't judge me too harshly. Without further ado, let's get into this practice test. I haven't seen the questions before. I've just set up the test for the video. So they have plenty of tests. It looks like they're all free. It's hard to tell. I think they're all free. I'm going to do Diagnostic Test 1 and Section 1 Verbal Reasoning. I presume as soon as I click, it's going to start the timer, so I'm going to get straight into it. The professor regarded the student's theory with something, considering the overall idea creative, but the logic behind the specific details unsound. So he thinks the logic is bad, so he regarded the student's theory with indifference, ambivalence, deliberation, condescension. Consternation is too harsh. Condescension is too harsh as well, because he did think the idea was creative. Indifference is not caring, but he does care. I think ambivalence, because there's good things, it's creative, but there's also bad things, the logic being unsound. So I think that's right. I'm teaching too much. I need to hurry up. Dylan's unwavering belief in the priority of self-interest was tantamount, so he loves self-interest, was tantamount to something. He took it as axiomatic that since he could never be sure of other people's beliefs or desires, he should focus only on his own. So this person really believes in being self-interested. Tantamount to selfishness, solipsism. He took it as axiomatic that since he can never be sure of other people's beliefs, he should focus solely on his own. Solipsism is looking inward. Selfishness, that's only right if the tone is negative. But they never really attack him. We never attack Dylan's beliefs, so selfishness is too harsh. To go axiomatic. Yeah, I think solipsism, just focusing on himself completely. Yeah, okay. A retreat to nature appealed to Thoreau for reasons other than the solitude that it provided. Okay, Thoreau believed that something, the untamed, put him in touch with, believe that immersion in, just being immersed in the untamed put him in touch with a simplicity, put him in touch with a something that by definition could not be replicated by the schemings of 19th century man. I would normally say simplicity, but it says could not be replicated. Simplicity is kind of the opposite of schemings as well. The untamed put him in touch with, believe that, an immersion in the untamed, not lionization, with by definition could not be replicated by the schemings. Austerity would fit with the the untamed. Put him in touch with an unpredictability. This is hard. I believe that put him in touch with an unpredictability that could not be. I mean, that would fit with untamed. It's not a very great question, I'll be honest, because there's nothing that jumps out. And the an is kind of suggesting it's D or E, but simplicity could also be right. I think the only answer I can go with is unpredictability based on the fact it's untamed. But that's not positive though. Unpredictability is not positive, and we're talking about appealing to throw. So I would say simplicity, but the an is wrong. So that's really weird. I'm just gonna have to go with that. Okay, alarmists attribute the startling rise of student debt to the greed of for-profit universities. Okay, by focusing on the something of these institutions, greed, so avarice is greed, the critics overlook the more troubling trend in American culture. The belief that education is just another commodity whose value should be quantified economically. It's a commodity, so you can quantify it economically. Pretty straightforward, that one. The inability of economists to something the causes of financial recession. Delineate, like understand, not going to exacerbate, not going to mollify, should not, as some critics believe, be taken as a commentary on the limits of economics as a science. In every science, be it physics, chemistry, or psychology, the practitioners of the field put faith not in their results, but in their methodologies, as long as they are adhering to the appropriate mode of analysis. Scientists are confident that questions that can be answered eventually will be. In every science, be it physics, practitioners field put faith not in their results, but in their methodologies, not equivalencies, as long as they are adhering to the appropriate mode of analysis. That's analysis rather than calculation, so it fits more with methodology. Put faith not in their results, but in their methodologies, as long as they are adhering to the appropriate mode of analysis, confident that questions that can be answered eventually will be. I think methodologies is better than calculations, so I'd go with that. Okay, scientific discovery is generally something process, a cumulative, not erroneous process, impertinent, no, it has to be cumulative, it builds up. But those discoveries that tend to alter the trajectory of human thought are often made in isolation of previous work, could be paradigms or calculations. So these discoveries that alter the trajectory are often made in isolation, okay? Darwin's discovery of evolution, for example, though mainstream today, was not obviously something. I've got to scroll down here. Oh, how do I scroll down? I have to extend the window, I think, to scroll down. Okay. There we go. Was not obviously anticipated by the work of naturalists before them. They didn't see it coming. Even though it's mainstream today, they didn't see it coming. But what about B, the second blank? Often made in isolation of previous, not exemplars. That's like a paragon. Calculations, no, it doesn't fit with evolution. Paradigms is like a way of thinking. Yeah. Okay. Nice, happy with that. In the country of Bun-Rose, the government has a monopoly on tobacco products. 30 years ago, in response to a rise in tobacco-related illnesses, the government decided to limit sale. Good for them. Despite the loss in tobacco-related revenue, the government's net revenue was no less this year than it was 30 years ago. Maybe that means that the government is saving money because of healthcare costs or something like that, probably. Which of the following, if true, best explains why the government's net revenue did not decrease since it limited the sale of tobacco products? In addition to limiting its sale of tobacco products, the government also ran advertisements? No. Many members of the government's legislature? No. 20 years ago, most people were aware? No. All healthcare is government funded. It's not a great answer, but it's what we're going for. It's kind of like they're saving money in healthcare, and that's why it's a good decision, and they're making more money, basically. Consumers who spend money on tobacco products spend the majority on private goods. No. All the other ones have irrelevant stuff, and that's why it's pretty confident in D. Okay. When Edward O. Wilson argued for the concept of consilience, no idea what that is, he had in mind the unification of all the scientific disciplines under one broad theory. Ooh. Wilson believed that the reducibility of psychology to biology, biology to chemistry, and chemistry to physics implied that, with the proper conceptual and methodological tools, scientists would eventually be able to study all of these disparate domains within the same framework. Impressive. Though most scientists agree with Wilson's basic premise, attempts at realizing his concept have been sparse and often met with a combination of amusement and scorn. Why scientists have been so reluctant to pursue his project and to entertain others' attempts? Why scientists have been so reluctant to pursue his project and entertain others' attempts is due, at least partly, to the entrenched methodologies of each of these disciplines. So they're entrenched, they don't want to work with each other, I guess. The tools that psychologists use to study their subjects differ fundamentally from what biologists use to study their subject matter. Makes sense? And these tools differ just as drastically from what chemists use to study theirs. Any attempt to bridge the gap between fields necessitates a break with orthodoxy, a break with current understanding, being a rebel basically, and by extension an introduction of tools and concepts that the established thinkers in a field are simply unfamiliar with. So that's the problem with doing all this, is that the established thinkers are just unfamiliar with all these new tools and new concepts, like a psychologist is not familiar with a chemist's work and that kind of thing. All makes sense. According to the passage, what accounts for most scientists' reactions of amusement and scorn? Okay, I wonder why they're amused and scornful. Doubt about the plausibility. No one really doubted his theory. Concern that attempting to achieve consilience would undermine the credibility. We didn't talk about credibility. Lack of familiarity with the approach necessary to achieve consilience. That's what they talked about, being unfamiliar. Quickly check the others. Inability, no. Ambivalence, no. Pretty straightforward, that one. Select the sentence that explains why Wilson was in favour. Implied that with the... I think because if we have consilience, we can study all these disparate domains within the same framework. That's like the dream. That's why he liked it. All the other stuff is the negatives. The second paragraph is the negatives. I get that the first one is unifying all the scientific disciplines, but that's not like why we're doing it. That's just what we're going to do. This one is the goal. We get to study all of these within the same framework. Yeah, happy with that. Back to this again. It can be inferred from the passage that scientists would be more open to attempts at consilience if which of the following were true. Well, if they were familiar with the different methodologies, I'd say. Yeah, scientists in other fields also accepted. That's not the major problem. Maybe the approach necessary to achieve consilience was part of the repertoire. Yeah, if they were trained and they were aware of the tools and concepts and they weren't just unfamiliar with it, then the problem would go away, right? They would have familiarity with how to do it, so that's not a problem anymore. So B is looking good. A is just not as good because it's kind of like, even if the other scientists accept it, they're still unfamiliar with the tools and concepts, so it wouldn't work. Whereas this, if it's part of their repertoire, they could do it. No with C, no with D, no, we don't talk about empirical. Okay. Select the two answer choices that complete the sentence in a way that makes sense. Oh, sentence equivalence. The coffee shop's business plan, though something in the short term, would ultimately undermine. So though it's great in the short term, it would undermine the goal. So it's lucrative in the short term, profitable in the short term, but in the long term, we undermine our goal of being profitable. Happy with that? So, okay. Though not without justification, the athlete's decision to forego college only reinforced the widely held belief of his. If we're saying though not without some justification, we're basically saying this is a silly decision. You've got some justification, but it's silly. So it reinforced the widely held belief of his silliness, his impetuosity, being reckless. They're similar. Denigration is way too harsh. Consilience, I still don't know that word. Diligence is positive. Miserly is with your money. So basically he's being reckless by foregoing college. They're both negative words that are not too harsh. I'm teaching again, so I'm using up too much time. Okay, select two choice. Offering only loose guidelines, the recipe gave cooks the opportunity to practice something. Creativity, because if we only have loose guidelines, gave the opportunity to practice something when creating the dishes. Creativity I'm looking for? Oh, it's one of the answers. Creativity, ingenuity. Yeah, very happy with that. Despite the strides made in contemporary neuroscience over the past 50 years, knowledge of certain brain processes is incomplete. Cool. And in some cases, downright lacking. So it's not just incomplete. In some cases, it's downright empty, negligible, and actually, there's no other one that fits there. Despite the strides made in contemporary neuroscience over the past 50 years, knowledge of certain brain processes is incomplete, and in some cases, downright negligible would fit there. Definitely not anachronistic. Fleeting is not the same as negligible. This means going away quickly. Porous means like water can flow through it. It's kind of not very strong. But that wouldn't fit with any of the other words. That's not the same as negligible. Lackadaisical means like kind of silly, not putting your full effort into it. But that doesn't really fit. So I don't know interminable. I think that means it never ends. Wow. Despite the strides made over the past 50 years, knowledge of certain brain processes is incomplete. And in some cases, downright. Interminable doesn't sound like negligible. Maybe it means negligible? But the others just don't fit. Lackadaisical doesn't fit with any of the others. Porous doesn't fit with any of the others. Anachronistic is about time. That's definitely wrong. So I say this a lot to students actually. I'd rather pick an answer I don't know the meaning of that could be the same as negligible than pick one that I know is not the same, like fleeting. Why would knowledge be fleeting? Downright fleeting, you wouldn't say that. So I'm guessing that interminable, even though I think it means lasting forever, maybe means the same as negligible. That is a complete guess. That's interesting. I just don't know that word, so I can't really progress without it. It is a belief so common as to be hackneyed, cliched. There exists a linear and continuous relationship between the themes and characters of a novelist's work and the life of the novelist himself. Cool. We need not look far to find rebuttals to this theme. Okay, so in some novels, there is no link to the life of the novelist himself. But in the case of Dostoevsky, we find a counterpoint to this broader cynicism. So maybe this is an example where there is no link, because it's a counterpoint to the broader cynicism of a linear relationship. An obvious example is The Gambler, wherein the main character's tragic gambling addiction closely parallels Dostoevsky's own lifelong travails with the roulette wheel and the subsequent financial consequences. Oh, so that's an example where it does link. So there are rebuttals to that theme, but then Dostoevsky is a rebuttal to the rebuttal. That's weird. Okay, closely parallels Dostoevsky's own lifelong travails. Anyway, that's an example of the novel being linked to the author. Makes sense. but more broadly, the redemptive and existential overtones of his great novels, Crime and Punishment, Brothers Karamazov, almost finished reading that, by the way, didn't finish it though, have their antecedent in Dostoevsky's infamous encounter with the firing squad. So it does again link to his own life. Though Dostoevsky was reprieved from death at the last minute, the experience laid the foundations for the themes that characterize his more mature works: mortality, salvation, and compassion. So basically, the author's saying that belief is true, it looks like. There is a linear and continuous relationship between the themes and the characters and the life of the novelist himself. And some people rebut that, but Dostoevsky is a great example of that. Okay, I think I understand that. The passage is primarily concerned with, so overall, we want a nice and vague answer here. Debating the likelihood that a novelist will introduce real life experiences into his fiction. No, it's more about Dostoevsky. B, the problem is it's not just his experience with the firing squad. It's also gambling, so that's too specific. Arguing for a commonly held belief about the relationships of an author's experience and the contents of an author's novels. Yes, the person's arguing for that common belief that there's a link. The author's saying, yes, there is a link. Here's a good example. So definitely that. Quickly check the others for fun. Evaluating his ability to make characters. No. Highlighting the impact that intense personal. No, it's too broad. It's about Dostoevsky, the whole passage. So we've got to include him to a certain extent. Okay. The author most likely mentions Crime and Punishment. So let's think to ourselves before looking at the answers. The reason he mentioned that is to say that basically all of those themes, not just examples, but themes, come from something that happened in his life. That's why he mentions, or the author mentions, those two things. There you go. Just exactly what I said. Provide examples of novels that were influenced by actual events. Problem with B is it's only talking about those two things. It's not really emphasizing those two things. It's talking about the origin of those things in his life. So I think A is better than B. Suggests that the themes of the gambler, no. Illustrate the influence that Dostoevsky's experience with the firing squad had on his novels. Actually, what's the difference between A and D? Provide examples of novels that were influenced by actual events. But then the gambler was as well. So maybe this is a bit better, because it wasn't just to provide examples of novels that were influenced by actual events, because we already have that with the gambler. So the real reason to bring those two up was to say this. I wanted to illustrate the influence that the firing squad had on his novels. I think D is better, because we already have the examples. That's why not A. Correct a misconception, definitely not. Interesting. Do I fully agree with D? In order to illustrate the influence. Yeah, that is why the author brought it up. More broadly. Yep. Let's double check that. Illustrate the influence that his experience had on his novels. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I can't see D being wrong, but I can see A being wrong. So I think D is better. Okay. In the context of the passage, hackneyed most nearly means cliche. Quite easy. Yep. From 1980 to 2000, overall expenditures on prescription drugs in Centreville had increased. Oh dear. To curb this increase, the government of Centreville banned pharmaceutical companies from increasing the prices of their drugs. Okay, sounds good in a way. Nonetheless, 10 years following the ban, per capita expenditure on prescription drugs had increased. How could that happen? Well, even if the prices are not going up, maybe people are buying more of the drugs. So even if the price is the same, they're just buying more of it. That's the obvious guess. Which of the following, if true, most likely explains why the government's action did not achieve the desired effect? That's my prediction, that people are buying more. Are they talking about 2010? Talking about 1980 to 2000. That's so weird. Oh, 10 years following the ban. Okay, 2010. Bad maths. Okay, citizens aged 65 or older accounted for a larger percentage of the population. That kind of makes sense. Accounts for a larger population than they did. That would kind of explain it. If the population is on average older and they consume the most, then more as a percentage of them is going to increase the number of drugs bought, which is kind of my prediction, but in a roundabout way. It's good, but let's see if there's a better one. To offset the potential loss in revenues caused by the ban, decrease their advertising. Well, that wouldn't explain it. Things have gone up, expenditure's gone up. The population increased. Tempting, but no, because we talked about per capita. During the time period, the government passed laws that loosened restrictions on more affordable generic drugs. If they're more affordable, then the amount we're spending is going to go down, so not D. Because of the ban, several foreign prescription drug manufacturers limited their advertising, but that would make it go down. So A little bit tough, but it explains it. We have more older people as a percentage in our population, and they buy more drugs, and that kind of fits with my prediction that people were just buying more drugs. Ooh. Do we have, I'm guessing just 2 questions, right? 2 questions in 4 minutes. Let's see if I can do this. Gonna have to speed up now. What are we to make of the Ninth Symphony? The fact that Beethoven created this masterpiece while battling with encroaching deafness has given his work a prominent place. Even when considered in a vacuum, the first 3 movements of the symphony rightfully receive nearly universal praise, not just because he's deaf, just because they're amazing. But then there is that 4th movement, at once groundbreaking for its use of words and off-putting with its straightforward text and sentimentality. So a bit more debatable, that 4th one. One wonders about the impetus behind this decision to use the Ode to Joy, a text that praises the divine that is always implicit in Beethoven's work, but that does so in such an overt way that the previous movements are almost rendered superfluous. But basically, the 4th one is praising God, praising the divine in a really obvious, overt way, which kind of is so different from the previous movements, and they're rendered superfluous, almost unnecessary. Weird. Unfortunately, it seems as though Verdi was onto something when he made the following claim about the symphony. No one will ever surpass the sublimity of the first movement, but it will be an easy task to write as badly for voices as is done in the last movement. Wow. Massive slap down going on here of the 4th movement. Saying the first one and maybe the first 3 are awesome, but the 4th one was just so overt, so badly written. The passage is primarily concerned with why he wrote his 9th? No. Evaluating? Yeah, because that's fitting with the first question. What are we to make of it? Good, bad? Evaluating, yeah. Not the differences between the first 3 movements, because it's the 4th one. The symphony and the last movement of his 9th symphony. Is that just symphony in general and the last movement? It's a badly phrased question, I'll be honest. Analysing the context? No. Questioning the text? No, it's about more than that. I'd say evaluating is a nice broad answer. Saying here are the good bits, what are we to make of Beethoven's 9th Symphony? Which of the following can be inferred about the author's opinion? He agrees with most critics. Yeah, he does think the first 3 movements rightfully received nearly universal praise. Considers the 4th movement largely unnecessary. Superfluous. Nothing of merit. Is the 4th one... don't know how much time. He's not giving me the seconds. It's annoying. He considers the 4th movement largely unnecessary. Oh, we can still worth studying. You can still study it. But it has got nothing of merit, but you can still study it. Okay, let's... there you go. There's the seconds, finally. Okay. So I got a bit more time than I thought. He agrees with most music critics. Yeah, he thinks that the first ones are great. Is the fourth one, he thinks it's bad, but is it unnecessary? But then the fourth one, once groundbreaking for its use of words and off-putting with its straightforward. One wonders about the impetus. It's more questioning. It's not saying offers nothing of merit to those studying. It's still worth studying. Unfortunately, it seems as though on something we made the following claim. Largely unnecessary. I think that's right. But we're going to find out, I guess. Yes. Okay, so let us look through the answers here. Overall, what do I think about the test? I think that a couple of the questions were a little bit off, maybe what the real thing would be like, but the vast majority of them were really good and definitely worth doing. And yeah, we'll see. I won't go over every single answer, and I didn't obviously teach as much as I could because of the time, but I will at least let you see the explanations. I think I would, if I was guessing, I'd think I got one wrong, but we'll see. Ambivalence, solipsism, that was a little bit hard, but yeah. Immersion, unpredictability, yeah. That's fine. Avarice, how do we even see? Yeah, commodity. Okay, delineate. Hard to scroll down on this actually. Software is a little bit dodgy. Okay, you can just about see that. Methodologies. Yeah. The one I think I'm interested in is in that interminable one. Ah, there you go. I can scroll down like this. Okay, so it's not so bad. I just have to scroll like that. So that was correct. I think that's the one I'm not confident on. That's fine. I'll let you look at the explanation if you want. You can pause it and see that. And not too much point in going through all of these, but I just wanted you to see I was right on that one. That was a fairly hard one. I want you to see the answers. Quite curious if I got all of them right. Yeah, that one here, we're coming up to the one that I think I might have gotten wrong. Not that one. That was fine. That one was fine. Oof, there you go. Interminable, negligible and porous. The contrast signal despite indicates, yeah, a good prediction would be lacking. Yes, that's what I said, lacking. Porous means lacking. Okay, I'm just going to Google that quickly. Does porous means you can flow through it, but does porous mean lacking? Porous means not secure. Yeah, I knew that. Not retentive. Permeable. Leaky. Yeah. You wouldn't describe knowledge as leaky. And absorbent, permeable. That is a weird answer, I'll be honest. I am fine with getting that wrong. In the real test, none of the questions were like that, where just none of the answers made sense at all. So, very happy with that. Porous and negligible are so different. That's not a great answer. The other ones were decent, I'll say. Okay. This one was fine. There was one that was debating, wasn't I? Ooh, here we go. A. What's wrong with D? D is incorrect because it's too narrow. The author suggests too narrow. The author suggests that Dostoevsky's experience with finance will influence the themes of his novels. The author mentions the novels to support his main point. Yeah, but he doesn't need to provide examples of novels. That's not why he mentioned those. To say, look, here are some novels influenced by actual events, because we already had that here. That's a really debatable answer. Maybe I'm just a sore loser getting it wrong, but I'm not too happy with that one. D is incorrect, it's too narrow, though the author suggests. The author mentions the novels to support his main point. In order to provide examples of novels that were influenced by actual events. Yeah, I saw that at the time, but it's like, I don't know. I think I'm just picking up things that they maybe missed, that we already had examples. So it's not like you do something for a 5th time and the reason you're doing it is to give an example, because you've already done 4 other examples. You're doing it for a specific reason this time. Why bring up these 2 when you've already done this one? Because I'm bringing up these 2 to talk about the firing squad. I don't really agree with that. Maybe I'm just a sore loser. That one was fine. That one was fine. This one was fine, although that was quite hard. And this one was fine, although that was pretty hard. It was an attack on the 4th movement, saying it wasn't very good, a little bit superfluous, although it didn't really say that. It said it rendered the previous movement superfluous, not the 4th movement. So I didn't know whether to pick it or not. So not a perfect question still, even though I got it right. Either way, it was useful to a certain extent to go through this because you could see my timing in action. You could see how you can genuinely still read slowly and get a really good result. I think in my defense, I do admit if I get a question wrong and I just genuinely didn't know the word. And I guess I didn't know interminable. So if I hadn't known that with more confidence, let me just check actually, was I right? Interminable means without end, right? If I'd had a bit more confidence in that, maybe I'd have picked porous. Yeah, but I don't know, it's still not correct. So I still would say that normally I admit when I'm wrong, but actually the 2 that I got wrong here, I'm not particularly sad about because I think I analysed it correctly. But either way, I hope this experience was instructive and you can see that I'm not perfect, but many people have requested I do such a thing. So I wanted to do it even if there wasn't quite as much teaching as I would normally like. Hope that was helpful. And if you like this one, I can do an equivalent for quant. See you in the next one.